The preseason has concluded for the Chicago Bulls as we await another week before the start of the regular season. The Bulls go 3-1 in the preseason, and although I thought about doing a post-game video to recap the Bulls' win last night over the Bucks, the game was a little misleading given both teams didn't have their best players, so I thought I would discuss and recap the Bulls' preseason as a whole and what to expect as we head into the regular season. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, overall, this was a pretty solid preseason for the Bulls as it related to their flow and style of offense as well as their team chemistry. I mean, really, aside from that very first game, that very first half, really, of the first game against the Pelicans, the Bulls played pretty good basketball. They were organized, played smart, played with good pace. Honestly, it reminded me a lot of the Bulls' last preseason where they played well together under different lineups and clicked as a whole. For me, the things you had to be encouraged by most, and I touched on this in some of the previous post-game videos, but one was Nikola Buchevich and his consistently good play. Vuce last night had yet another good game in which he finished with 17 points on 7 for 9 shooting, 2 for 3 from 3 to go along with 11 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 steals. We talked about this before, but Vucevic playing at an all-star level, like the player that they traded for, to have him providing consistent offense, shooting at a high enough rate to where defenses aren't just leaving him wide open for threes because it made more sense to double up DeMar and Zach and leave Vucevic open because he couldn't hit his shots. If Vuce can get back to shooting threes at near 40%, playing aggressively in the post to where he's not only scoring within 3 feet of the basket, but also playmaking and creating plays for others in the post, that is a game changer for the Bulls, even if it means that Lonzo has to miss a good portion of the season. To have Vucevic, a confident Vucevic who can clean the glass, score at an elite level, at an efficient level, is what we need to see for the Bulls to truly be at their best, because having Vuce play a subpar season like last year was really a killer, especially closing out the year. And then, of course, the other piece, Javonte Green, arguably was the Bulls' best and most consistent player in the 4 preseason games, was incredibly efficient, was a huge energizer, was active and hustling on both ends of the floor. Again, I know it's only preseason, but if you have a guy like Javonte playing at a high level as a role player, whether it's coming off the bench or as the Bulls starting power forward, to have a guy like Javonte who has improved his game on offense immensely, both as an outside shooter, but also a shot creator and playing off of the dribble, and of course, with his ability to play off the ball and cutting to the basket, that relieves some of the pressure on guys like DeMar and Zach, who were responsible for most of the Bulls scoring last season. And then finally, Patrick Williams, because last night we finally got to see a good, strong, and aggressive Patrick Williams, which we didn't really see in the prior 3 games. Now granted, we have seen this from Patrick before, where he plays incredibly well when the stakes are very low or the best players are sitting out. Everyone likes to revert back to that final game of the regular season against the Wolves last year, in which the Bulls rested DeMar, Zach, and Vucevic, and the Wolves didn't have any of their best players in either because it was a meaningless game and didn't really impact either team as related to their overall seeding in the playoffs. And Patrick looked great in that game. Last night, going against the Bucks reserves, Patrick had one of his most assertive games in which he was active on offense and throwing down dunks with authority. 22 points on 9 for 17 shooting, 1 for 5 from 3, so you'd like to see him score on better efficiency, but I would rather see Pat get more involved on offense and take more shots, even if it means he's missing, to build and gain that confidence going into the regular season. Because the last thing you want to see is Pat put up 5 shot attempts in a game and get 3 rebounds because he's just standing on the corner while other guys are driving to the basket. Patrick also had 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and only 1 turnover to go along with his 22 points in 32 minutes of play. I actually like that Donovan left him in the game for some time to get him more exposure and more comfortable rather than sitting him and opting to give some of the two-way players more minutes. Patrick needs as much development as he possibly can, even if it means playing more minutes in a meaningless preseason game. Some other callouts from the preseason action: Andre Drummond has actually looked great, both from a rebounding perspective, which we know that he could do. It's part of the reason why the Bulls signed him, to give them some added size and rebounding, as the Bulls were one of the worst rebounding teams last year. But aside from his rebounding, what has stood out to me also is Drummond's scoring, and more importantly, his outside shooting when he hit 3 threes against the Raptors the other night. Not saying we should start expecting Drummond to be putting up threes all the time, but if it's not an element to his game to where defenses actually have to respect him standing along the perimeter, that's really key for the Bulls and their floor spacing in the second unit. But last night, Drummond had a solid game, 16 points on 7 for 9 shooting, 9 rebounds, was a plus 19, doing all of this in just 18 minutes of play. I wasn't too high on the Drummond signing when it happened. It was a bit of a head scratcher for me, especially when, in my view, there were better backup 5 options when free agency first opened. But now, I'm actually very intrigued to see what Andre Drummond can bring to this Bulls team, as we were incredibly depleted last season for guys to play behind Vucevic. Like, when you have Derrick Jones Jr. playing the 5, it's not going to be easy when you're going against teams that have multiple players at the 4 and 5 standing 6'10", 6'11" tall. One other piece we learned last night as well was that, according to Billy Donovan in his post-game interview, Dosunmu will be getting the start at point guard to start the season in Lonzo's absence, which I think is great. I feel like he's earned that spot with his play, is the most competent and talented guard to play that role. I did think Dragic was going to start because I know how much Billy loves his veterans, but Ayo, for his development going into his second season, the fact that he's a talent who can play solid defense in a starting lineup that needs defense, and a guard who has continued to improve his game on offense as well, yeah, Ayo is the way to go, and hopefully can hold down the fort while we await for Lonzo's return. Dragic did have a good game last night, though, after not playing in the game against the Raptors. Played 19 minutes, scored 13 points on 6 for 9 shooting, had some nice turnaround jumpers, 4 assists, was plus 18, which is great to see because you're still going to need to see Dragic play well while Lonzo remains out of the lineup. And then the other takeaway for the Bulls and their preseason was the play of Dalen Terry, because while I think most assume that it's going to be hard for Terry to crack the Bulls' rotation in his rookie season, especially with how stacked the Bulls are with guards, he's played well enough and with enough fire and energy that he could find himself into the Bulls' rotation for this season. I like that he started last night's game with DeMar and Zach being out. Like, you might as well try it out and see how this kid does in preseason. And while the numbers don't pop out at you in the box score, it's the plus 17 that stands out to me in terms of his impact on the court. And aside from the box plus minus, I've said it before, but for me, it's all about his energy and how he gets the team and crowd into games. He was essentially the sole reason for why the Bulls came back in that game against the Pelicans and nearly won it after it looked like it was going to be a for sure blowout, and did it off of his hustle play and versatility on both ends of the floor. We'll see what kind of impact Terry will be able to bring in his rookie season when he's going to be competing for minutes against so many other players, but the future potential on this kid is clear based on what we have seen from him thus far and as he continues to develop further as a player. The other thing I will add as it relates to last night's game was in regards to Coby White, as he played a solid game being in the starting lineup. 15 points on 5 for 12 shooting, 4 for 8 from 3, was a plus 12 on the night. This is another guy who's playing in a contract year, so he's going to be trying to play his best basketball, whether it be for an extension with the Bulls or getting a payday from another team. The biggest thing, though, can he play well consistently? That's really been the biggest thing holding Coby back from getting a sizable contract, which, by the way, the Bulls have less than a week now to reach an extension agreement with him, but I find that very unlikely, really, for both sides, because the Bulls aren't going to be willing to offer him a long-term deal with all the other guards that they have. And for Coby in his camp, based on the season he had last year, it would actually be wise for him to play out this season in a prove-it year to hope for a better contract when he becomes a restricted free agent. As a team, though, in this preseason, the Bulls shot the ball well, decent from 3, although still something they need to work on, and shooting wasn't really addressed at all in the offseason, although who knows, if Drummond can start shooting threes, then maybe they did address their lack of shooting. I kid, but things can still happen. There is still the possibility of trades. There are guys like Jordan Clarkson, Duncan Robinson, maybe even Joe Harris, who are on the trading block that could greatly benefit the Bulls from a shooting perspective if they can make a deal work, but it's also something I find unlikely for all those guys, because you would probably have to give up too much in salaries to make a deal work. But either way, shooting for the Bulls in the preseason was solid. Rebounding was significantly better than anything we saw last season, and Drummond has helped out with that immensely. And how about the ball movement from these guys? Not so much in the first game of the preseason, which looked like a repeat of the end of last year, but the Bulls were one of the best passing teams of the preseason, and it was really a collective effort where multiple guys were racking up assist totals. Everybody was touching the ball in possessions. The guys were moving quickly in transition with outlet passes, and doing all of this without Lonzo. It's great to see, because that was the biggest issue and weakness of the Bulls after Lonzo got injured, was their overall passing and pace, and just how stagnant their offense became when Lonzo was out of the lineup. So for the Bulls to be able to put up more than 30 assists per game in the preseason, that is a good sign as you head into the regular season. And hey, last night, the Bulls even took care of the ball and only had 14 turnovers compared to some of the other preseason games. So look, overall, it is just the preseason, right? We always have to add that. You can't get too excited when you see how certain players perform in games that don't count towards anything, but the preseason at least gives you an indication of what can be expected and what needs to be worked on going into the season, and so far, I'm actually encouraged by what I've seen. The team hasn't been perfect, there are still a lot of holes to address, but hopefully they can work some of that out over time as they go through the regular season. But let me know in the comments what you guys thought were some of the big takeaways from the Bulls preseason play. I have a special guest coming on the show tomorrow, so be sure to tune into that. Until then, guys, as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.